Welcome back, marvelous 8th graders, for another podcast featuring myself, Mr. Ramey, Miss Blashenko,
Hi.
and Miss Coleman.
Hi, everyone.
So, to start off at the top of the podcast, I had a fantastic Mother's Day and did some delightful things for my wife. We did breakfast in bed. I got her some delightful flowers, roses, if you're curious.
Oh, what color?
Red. It's the color of love.
And you love her. That's so nice.
Quick hint, don't give your significant other orange.
Do they make orange flowers?
I didn't know that, but that is a color for not good things.
What?
So apparently, yeah, didn't know it. Got my wife orange flowers one year. Mistake. Don't do it. Don't do it, fellas.
Okay.
How was your Mother's Day?
Go ahead, Kirsten.
Mine was nice. At least, she's 2. So I am teaching her how to treat me nice. And so I told her that it was Mother's Day, and so we get donuts. So Elise was really excited to get in the car and go get donuts. And then I told her she needs to tell me Happy Mother's Day, and she repeated it back to me. So, it's all about the training. 5 years from now, she'll be good.
Yeah. That sounds really sweet. Did you see your own mom?
I did see my own mom, and I made her lunch. Nope, dinner. We had ribs and homemade macaroni and cheese, and 2 desserts, like a flourless chocolate cake, which is so good, and then a coconut cake, and
Sounds really good.
it was really good.
You're making my mouth water.
Yeah, I've been eating cake for the last couple days.
Jeff made me a bomb cake, too. It was like this molasses ginger cake. Yeah, with whipped cream frosting. And we actually froze most of it because it's like so decadent that if it's in the fridge, I'll eat the whole thing. So that was a really sweet thing he did. My Mother's Day was wonderful. It started off really chaotic because I woke up and my whole family-in-law was on Skype at like 6 in the morning.
Because they're in a different time zone, right?
Yeah, they're in Toronto, so it's like, it was 9 for them. And I thought I was waking up to go back to bed, and I was not. So we Skyped with my mother-in-law, and that was really sweet. And then Jeff started to put together this like beautiful lunch for me and my mom and my sister. And it just turned into total pandemonium chaos. Like at one point, like I went into the kitchen and there was just like food everywhere. He had like not started the cake until an hour before people were supposed to come, and I just got so stressed out, and I said, Jeff, I have to go take a walk. And I took a walk, and when I was about to like re-enter my house, I was really calm, and I was like, all right, whatever I walk into, like he is just doing it because he loves me and it's okay. And I walked into the house, and Lucy had taken her crayons, and she was coloring all over the kitchen walls. So
Did you get crayons off?
Yeah, we buy the wonderful ones. Yeah, it was totally fine. And we had a really nice time. It was just like the first 2 hours were absolute chaos. And yeah, I did. I came back, and my toddler was just coloring all over the kitchen, and there was like flour all over the floor. And like 4 pots were going, and anyway, it was really, really nice. We had a good time. Jeff made me one of those things where the kids stand up against the wall and you measure them like a measuring tape.
Oh, yeah. We made that for my mom.
It's really, really cute. And it's got Lucy's little handprint on it.
Yeah, how cute.
Oh, that's adorable.
Yeah, so anyway, that's a long story, but it was good. It's just a good story. Should we get started with our podcast?
Yeah, let's start.
Cool.
I want to give a shout out for the people who found the mistakes. Great job, Morgan. The Constitution was signed in 1787.
1887.
No, not 1887.
It says 18.
No, it's 1787.
I think there's been a recent change.
And
What do you know?
the first census was 1790, so great job, Haley, for finding those mistakes. And someone found a mistake, but she didn't want to be named.
Oh, ornaments.
No. Yes. So great job, kids.
And we've got some pretty hard workers, so we'd like to recognize them publicly here. In my classes, Paige Ebert, Talina Zander, Connor, Casey, Annalie, Marshall, Daniela, Chloe Wall, and Cooper. You guys are really bringing it, so keep it up.
Way to go, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Any hard workers you would like to add to the awesome job list?
I am seeing a lot of hard work from Tatiana, from Mason, Daniel Spencer, Artem, Emma Bryan.
Yeah, and Lizzie, she's doing some awesome work along with Michael, Jacob Shoemaker, Laura, Haley Navarro. They're doing some great work. So keep it up, guys. We are really looking forward to reading your work is probably over dramatic. Your work, guys, and we like to see that you're doing your work. So good job.
And if we didn't shout you out, it's not because you're not doing anything and we don't see it. It's just those are the kids who are really going above and beyond.
Yes, and we can only shout out to so many kids at a week. So if you want to shout out for next week, send us a note, do excellent work, let us know. So last week, what did we talk about last week, guys? It was like a week away, I forgot.
Oh, that was a whole week ago. We were talking about how the whole country was kind of gearing up for a big conflict. There was a lot of tension in a lot of different areas.
Oh yes, the causes of the Civil War. Like why
Yeah.
does the war happen now? Okay.
Yeah, that was our big question. Like, why is the war happening now? We really focused in on Kansas as this like little microcosm of what was going to happen next.
What an awesome word, micro.
That's great.
I like it. Yeah, and with the border ruffians, I remember.
Yeah, Ramey's fifth period. Yeah,
Ramey's fifth
Shout out
period.
to all my border ruffians. Thanks for being on border and ruffians.
And so, what's our focus this week? What are we focusing on as much?
so we're kind of looking at like what happened after Kansas, right? So like we have this little or like small example of an internal civil war, and then like how did that expand out to the country?
Yeah, so we got the Fugitive Slave Act, we got Dred Scott, and we have, the caning of that Congress guy. Danny, what's his name again?
Charles Sumner.
Yeah, and that's all about state versus federal rights.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get going, I think there's some words that we need to kind of define for the kids and for us. Popular sovereignty is one of them, and I know we defined it last week, but that is a word that I know every year when I'm teaching, the kids are like, wait, I don't know what this is. So popular sovereignty, what is that, guys?
It just basically means that the people are the ones who create the government through electing officials. And when it comes to the topic of slavery, when we narrow down on it specifically, it's talking about that state by state, they would allow or not allow slavery based on how they would vote in their own state. And that was how so remember we've had this like large expansion of our country, right? We did
westward
the
expansion. We kept
right?
adding more land.
Yeah, so as we have more land carved out into states, then they have to decide, are they going to be free states or slave states? And that's that concept of popular sovereignty is like, well, you'll just let that state decide when it comes to them.
Yeah, the people get to decide.
Yeah.
Okay. I know that.
I agree.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Ramey. Didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay. I was just saying I agree with everything that Miss Coleman just said.
Very nice, very nice. I know the other word is sectionalism. Mr. Ramey, what is sectionalism? How do kids always, that's a hard word to get.
Yeah, well, if you think about it as we know the word section, so it's about identifying with a section of the country, a part of the country, more than the whole country. So people thought of themselves more as Northerners or as Southerners rather than as Americans. The country had lost the whole unifying kind of nature of the Revolutionary War by this point, and they were very much in different sort of states of mind because they thought of themselves as different based on where they lived and how they lived. Last week we learned about the difference between the two sections of the country. The South was generally like hotter and warmer, and the North was colder, and they got snow in the winter, and the South didn't. And these things just kind of drove people apart in their different kind of ways that they lived.
Okay. Yeah, and we have a couple new words this week. So this week our new words are union, fugitive, and then abolish. And we did abolish last week. Remember, abolish is like to get rid of something. So
Yes.
slavery means we're getting rid of it. Okay. And then our other new word is secession. So fugitive, like the Fugitive Slave Act. When I hear the word fugitive, I think of movies.
Me too.
Harrison Ford.
Yes. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah. The fugitive. So fugitive is when someone is running from the law. So Fugitive Slave Act would be like the slaves are running from the law. Obviously more to go with it, but the word fugitive means you're running from the law. What about union? Union, it's not the high school. Like, what does union mean?
Well, when we're talking Civil War, it's just common to call the Union the North. They're kind of interchangeable. Eventually, the Union is synonymous or the same as people who support Lincoln, but that comes a bit later.
Okay,
And they're typically they're anti-slavery states.
Okay, so the Union's kind of the North, people in slavery, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Right, all right. And secession, that's a hard word to say for me.
That's a hard word to say for everybody.
Is it? Not just me? I'm not super
It's a
special?
tongue twister.
Okay.
Hard not to say like succession.
Secession, okay.
So secession is when you have one group that's breaking away from another parent group. So like the United States broke away from England in the Revolutionary War. And now the South is trying to break away from the rest of the Union during the Civil War. They're seceding.
They're breaking away.
But they may not be succeeding.
Not succeeding and seceding.
Is this one of your rainy puns that I hear all the time?
I would never pun.
Oh,
This
okay.
is serious business.
Hey, fun fact, did you guys know that in Canada, Quebec tries to secede still like every 30 years?
No.
Yeah, so it's still a concept that is relevant to where we live. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that Canadian history, I am not really informed.
Well, when you marry a Canadian,
Okay, so that's what I need to do now.
you just got to find a Canuck. They're good people.
Is that what they're called? Canucks?
Canuck. Yep. There's a whole like vocabulary, and when you go to Canada, it's like people are like, "Did you know that Jim Carrey is Canadian?" And they just really want you to know that like that funny person is not American.
Not American.
Noted.
Didn't know that actually. Thanks for the fun fact.
Uh-huh.
Oh, 8th graders, if you learn something, Jim Carrey is not an American. Well, he might be an American now.
But he lives
Does he
in
have
the
dual
US.
citizenship?
I think so. He lives
But
in
he's not
LA.
native born.
No, he's very
You
Canadian.
can't be the
Very much.
president. Because in order to be a president, you have to be native born. Okay. Whew.
Could you imagine Jim Carrey as the president?
That would be funny.
Fantastic.
Okay, we got to get back onto the Fugitive Slave Act.
Oh, yeah.
I like the word fugitive.
I can do this one because I feel like this was my specialty when I was researching.
Oh, it's your special baby?
It's my special little baby. I didn't mean for it to be, but it ended up being. And the reason I found myself more interested in this than I expected to be was because I remember really loving the movie 12 Years a Slave. So
That
if you
movie
guys,
gave me nightmares for weeks.
yeah, I mean it was gruesome, right? But it sticks with you. It's one of those movies that sticks with you visually. So when I was reading about this and researching, I think that was part of the reason I felt more, I don't know, inclined. So 8th graders, if you want a good movie and your parents are okay with it, it's gruesome, but it's good.
Yeah, you got to get your parents' permission because
Yeah. I'm not condoning you just watch it on your own.
No.
Because I can't. Okay, so Fugitive Slave Act, 1850. This was part of the package of agreements known as the 1850 Compromises. Okay, so in the 1850 Compromises, 1850, basically what happened was there was a compromise federally to balance out what the South got and what the North got. The Fugitive Slave Act was something that benefited the southern states. And some other parts of the compromises were that, and you guys learned about this last week, right? So California was able to join the Union as a free state. So there was no slavery there. There was no slave trade in Washington, D.C., so these all benefited the North. And then in order to balance it out, the South had to have some benefits too. So the South got that there were no slavery restrictions in the new territories of Utah and New Mexico, and there was slave holding allowed in Washington, D.C., which means that you could keep slaves, but you couldn't trade them anymore. And then there's this whole other side story that after the Mexican War on the border of like New Mexico and Texas, there was this compromise there too, because there was disputed land where basically the federal government said, okay, Texas, like you have to create a new border for yourself, but we'll give you $10 million. Texas agreed, and so that's how Texas has its current border. So anyway, all of these contributed to the 1850 Compromises. And the other thing in there that benefited the South was this Fugitive Slave Act. And basically what that meant was that slaves could be returned back to slavery. So if they had escaped slavery and they were like living in the North, they could be returned. So there had actually been all along an article in the Constitution, the fourth article, Article 4 of the Constitution, that had language to return fugitives. And so the language had always been there, but it was largely ignored by the northern states. Of course, this made southern states angry, right? And what it did was it kind of acknowledged that the North had been harboring and allowing fugitives and runaway slaves to kind of hide out in these northern cities, either en route to Canada or, just to stay in the North. And those laws were put in, so there were conflicting northern state laws to, what was I saying? I just lost my train of thought.
Northern state laws.
Oh yeah, so the northern states have laws to protect fugitive slaves that this Fugitive Slave Act kind of overruled. So this was a huge benefit for the South. Let's see, are there any other things?
I think that sounds...
One big consequence though of this was that several there are lots of cases of free black people, free blacks in the northern cities actually being kidnapped and taken to slavery in the South when they weren't actually slaves, which is like
about. That movie, 12 Years a Slave.
Yeah, so.
I actually have his book. So 12 Years a Slave was written by an African-American who was a slave. I forgot his name.
Solomon?
Solomon Northrop.
Yeah.
Anyways, I have his book, and if we were at school, I'd show it to you. Again, I've got like 3 chapters in and then had to stop reading because the details are just so horrific. It's horrible what human beings did to one another.
Yeah. So that's the gist of the Fugitive Slave Act. Hopefully I was articulate enough. But basically, runaway slaves could be returned.
Anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a sanctuary city or anything, a safe place.
No, I mean, there used to be, like Boston especially, New York. But yeah, no, that all changed. And created this kind of weird economy, right, where like slave owners would put out these large bounties, these large rewards for their slaves to be captured and returned. So it had some pretty significant consequences.
And so from what you're saying, like people that weren't slaves ended up getting like captured, and they would go to court or whatever, and people would claim, oh no, this person was my slave the whole time. And just get returned to this person?
And the slaves have no right in court. And that all came about with Dred Scott. Do you guys know about Dred Scott? So he was a slave, and his owner wasn't a big plantation person. He was a doctor. And so he treated Dred Scott, he was an army doctor, and his owner was John Emerson, who brought him and his wife along to travel to Illinois, where slavery is illegal there. So after his owner, Dr. John Emerson, passed away in 1843, Scott made a petition to the owner's wife, her widow, I think her name's Irene. It is Irene. And he said, hey, we're in a free state. I should be free. And she ended up taking them back to live in the South, Missouri. And she's like, nope, you and your wife are still slaves. So after a few years living there with the help from a lawyer in the North, he ended up suing for his freedom, making the argument that he is free because he had lived in a place of freedom.
And there was a law, right, that said that once a slave was in a free state, they couldn't be returned back to slavery.
Exactly, and he was after his Dr. Emerson died. Well, anyways, what happened is the Missouri courts granted his freedom because of this law. So Dred Scott, he got support from a lot of members of some of the churches and from abolitionists who were maintaining the cause. They would pay for all the lawyers because, as you guys know, lawyers are expensive. Anyways, the Missouri court granted the freedom, but the widower decided to go to the Missouri Supreme Court. Remember how you can go up in court levels? And so the verdict, so the outcome of the court decision was overturned, saying that Dred Scott was still a slave. So a couple years later, in 1853, Scott filed again with the U.S. Federal Court. And the federal court ruled against Scott again, and then Scott filed the last time at the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, all this is taking time. So it started in, I think, 1846, I believe, is when he filed his sued for his first freedom. And it wasn't until 1857, so 9 years before he went to the Supreme Court. And then at the Supreme Court, whatever the U.S. Supreme Court rules, that is final. So whatever their outcome is, that's the rule of the land. And the Supreme Court ruled in a 7-2 decision against Scott. And they had some major reasoning. And it's shocking. When you hear the reasoning, this is one of the main events leading to the Civil War because the reasoning is so appalling. So number one, the Supreme Court said Scott did not have a right to sue because he was a piece of property, not a citizen. He is not a citizen. He's not a person. He's a piece of property. Yeah, that didn't go over very well with abolitionists, with people in the North, with people part of the church. A lot of abolitionists in the church movement. Number two, the government cannot seize property. So they're saying Scott is property, and the government can't take property from a citizen. So his owner, Emerson, would be considered a citizen, and that's without due process of law. So if you guys remember, Amendment number 5, without due process of law, straight to that Bill of Rights, Amendment number 5. Number 3, this is the third reason. Again, crazy. Congress cannot ban slavery in territories because it violates property rights of people bringing their slaves there. Again, it's saying these are not people, they're property. Shocking, wrong, and it caused a lot of tension. And number 5. Yeah, sorry, Remy.
Yeah, it's just, well, what's that going to do to states like Kansas, their territory? And even if they vote to be a free state, if people already have slaves when they live there, when they become a free state, Do those slaves just get to keep being slaves?
And that's kind of what the Supreme Court ruled, because really, if you go to the last reason, the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, ruled that abolishing slavery was unconstitutional. Unconstitutional. That means that they cannot take it away.
On the premise that the slaves are property, not people.
Exactly.
Wow.
That was one of the main things that stirred the pot, moving people from being on the fence with slavery to kind of pushing them to that abolitionist movement. And you know what's really sad is that just a few years later, Scot ended up dying from tuberculosis, so he never even got to see freedom from after the Civil War. He ended up passing away.
Oh yeah, it is a horrible death. He was so after the whole Supreme Court decision, Irene Emerson, her husband, no, she was a widow, so she got remarried. Yeah, this guy was an abolitionist that she got married to, and a congressman. And so he learned that she owned slaves and was really savvy with the law. And so he decided that he was going to figure out a way to free Dred and Harriet, his wife. And so he found out that technically, what was it? Harriet and Dred could be sold. No, he sold Harriet and Dred back to the son of the original owner. Mm-hmm. And then the son of the original owner freed Harriet and Dred, and then Dred died less than a year later of tuberculosis. So he had this tiny little sliver. Yeah, it's really sad. I couldn't believe that when I read it. So long.
Interesting that she married an abolitionist.
Yeah.
Going through all the process for 9 years to slave.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to
slavery.
Have a coffee with Irene Emerson to see what happened in her brain. Because I wonder if she has a diary or something.
I have no idea.
Yeah,
Extra credit opportunity. Find the diary.
What was Irene Emerson thinking? Did she have a change of heart? Did she go through 10 years of court rulings and then realize she was wrong, or did she just so happen to marry this guy, or what? Yeah,
did she marry him for the political stance, or?
Yeah,
he was a really awesome baker.
He's a really awesome baker.
Yeah, that's why she married him. He made great
Calvin Chaffee, abolitionist.
Pastry chef. Pastry chef, yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. All right, Rainey, let's talk about the states and federal rights.
Let's talk about the rights. So, I guess this is a hotly contested issue. When we look at the idea about the federal government making a law that affects the entire country, a lot of people will be very upset about it, and you see it even ringing down to this day, that they don't want the federal government to have an overreach of power and tell the states what to do. Because you see in the Constitution, Amendment 9, I think, or 10, that says that any power that isn't reserved to the federal government by the Constitution, it belongs to the states.
Yeah, because that's
the last one.
Yeah, it's 10. They were, the founding fathers were really afraid of having a big central government.
Yeah. And people will fight against having a big central government to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this was a really big fight at the time. And this is where you find the popular sovereignty argument, the idea that people should be able to make their own decisions and states should be able to make their own choices about slavery.
Well, what's interesting is I actually read in the newspaper that with the coronavirus shutdowns that we're experiencing in Washington State, obviously there are people who are really unhappy with the decisions that our governor is making. And there have been protests in Clark County. So there was one 2 weeks ago at the Clark County courthouse led by a congresswoman. And then there was also one in Battleground, I think, like, yesterday or 2 days ago, right?
Yeah, on Monday, I think it was.
Yeah, so, like, this is that issue, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're a state, but that concept of, like, Washington State telling Battleground or Vancouver or Clark County how to operate, it's the exact same concept, right? It's pretty... Still,
It's still very relevant.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, you can understand that nobody likes being told what to do. It's not fun. It's not fun when your parents tell you what to do. On the other hand, it's often for your best interest or for your own good. Right?
Right.
But there's always a balance. Because, the Constitution does give the states the rights, and the Washington Constitution gives counties rights. So it's all about finding that balance, not being over authoritarian or power. Okay, so what's happening with the Civil War and that balance between state and federal?
So the Civil War, it kind of kicks off with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. There was a particular congressman, oh my gosh, I can't remember his name. He was pro-slavery, but he didn't want to appear pro-slavery. And so he just looked like he was in favor of letting the states decide. And that way he could be pro-slavery but not look like he was pro-slavery. And if the states decided to be slave states, so much the better for him. And people were really upset about this. We had the whole Bleeding Kansas situation, the Border Ruffians, John Brown, a lot of bloodshed that didn't need to happen happened there because politicians decided not to make decisions themselves, but to kind of push responsibility onto the general public and make them decide. And so we saw kind of the setup of a conflict in the idea that states get to decide for themselves versus the federal government deciding the law for a state. And that resulted in a senator, Charles Sumner.
Let's get to the juicy stuff.
The juicy stuff is where we're going.
That's the stuff I care about.
You go like,
hold your horses.
I don't even, from high school history, this is like the one thing I remember from learning about the Civil War. I mean, I remember like the basics, but this is like the detail I remember. So everyone
let's get to the
juicy stuff. One detail.
Get to it. It is the one detail I remember.
Charles Sumner was rightly really upset about Bleeding Kansas and all this stuff happening.
He's an abolitionist, right?
He's an abolitionist. He does not want slavery.
He's from Boston, which is like one of the biggest like harbor safe cities in the Union. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. He writes a speech and delivers it on the floor of the Senate. It takes like 2 days.
The Senate, that's like Congress, right?
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay,
that's like the big group of all the government officials that make laws. That's the legislative branch.
Okay, so he gives a big speech.
He talks about how terrible slavery is. He talks about how terrible slave owners are, and about South Carolina in specific.
Okay.
And about he gets super detailed and super insulting to individual people.
No tact.
No tact.
He is throwing shade.
Honestly, he's not very well liked. He's seen as very pretentious among his colleagues. People don't really like him.
Yeah, he was like a Boston lawyer, academic.
Yeah.
People kind of thought he was like nose up in the air.
Yeah, okay. He kind of presented himself as being better than other people.
Yeah, detached from reality.
And so there was one particular gentleman in specific who did not want to take this guff. This guy had insulted his family and his state, and he was not having it. And this man's name was Preston Brooks. And Preston thought about challenging him to a duel.
Wait.
Go on.
Preston must be from the South.
Preston was from the South. He was from South Carolina.
Oh, snap.
Dueling was like totally illegal because wasn't like Andrew Burr and John. Where's Kaya when I need her? Didn't Didn't dueling go out like a long?
Yeah.
It did, yes.
Aaron Burr and
Aaron Berg and Hamilton, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Dueling's not okay.
No.
So why is he challenging him to a duel?
Well, he thought about challenging him to a duel,
Oh, he thought. Okay.
but he did not actually challenge him to a duel. That would give him too much honor, meeting him on the field of battle honorably.
Okay.
Instead, he was talked into going into the Congress, going into the building,
Okay.
and instead just assaulting him because that's what he deserved.
So how do you assault someone?
Yeah, with what?
Walk me through this. What is it?
Let me set the stage for you.
Okay, set the stage.
Preston Brooks enters the room. The room looks nothing like it does now. It's a bunch of desks. They're bolted to the floor. They've all got chairs. They're all made out of wood. And there's like a podium, kind of a pulpit sort of a thing at the front of the room. Different members of Congress kind of milling around. And Charles Sumner is sitting at one of these desks and he's writing. And the desk, like I said, is bolted to the floor. The chair is all scooted in. Preston Brooks approaches him. He's got in his hand a cane with a metal tip.
Like a walking cane?
Like a walking cane. Like think about it like he's a Southern gentleman. He's got this fancy cane, and it's heavy. It's probably made out of hickory.
He's not an old.
He's not an old man. He's a young guy. He's able-bodied,
Okay. Okay.
and he's about to establish what we call shillelagh law if you're of the Irish descent.
Okay. That's not.
Extra credit if you look that one up too.
Let's send it to Miss Lushenko because I don't know what that is. Okay. So this guy is walking in. He has a cane.
And so he says to him something like, "You've insulted my family and my homeland, and I intend to answer to you for it." And he just starts beating him with this cane. Absolutely just hammers on him. He hits him in the head. Charles Sumner is immediately blinded. There's blood that goes into his eyes. His legs are trapped under this desk, so he's like trying to scramble away. He eventually uproots some of the bolts in the floor and ends up scrambling away, but doesn't get away far enough. Some congressmen try to intervene. There's another man there. I can't remember his name either, but he holds a pistol to anybody who wants to like stop this, and says, just let these two have it out. This is a private matter.
So nobody can even stop them.
And again, he's not well liked, so not many people are trying to stop this.
Yeah.
And he ends up getting beaten unconscious. Preston Brooks breaks his cane, shatters the cane, and then leaves. And as a result of this, senators and congresspeople start coming to write laws armed, and some of them with bodyguards, because there is the possibility that you could be assaulted while at work.
And these are our like elected government officials, right?
Yeah, these are people that are supposed to be like solving the conflicts in the country.
Yeah. So if that's what's happening in Congress, you can't imagine what's been happening outside the walls of Congress, right?
And
So
Brooks was considered a hero. Like people
yeah,
say
in the South,
people sent him canes. They had like, cute little sayings that they wrote on it.
they like engraved "hit him again" in canes and shipped it to him.
And and then people wonder why this conflict between the North and the South is really starting. Like it's getting more bitter, it's personal, it's bloody, it's violent, and we haven't even no one succeeded. What's that word again?
Seceded.
Seceded.
Not broken away yet. We're just fighting. That is crazy.
It's a crazy amount of just action and violence and bloodshed, especially in like a lawmaking body.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are really setting the examples.
He was brain damaged, basically, from that attack. He had to take time off of the Senate. Preston Brooks was removed for what that was worth, and he went back to South Carolina and served in government there.
Wow.
Crazy. And he wasn't in jail. He was considered a hero. Like, wow.
So if these are all set, if this we've got Dred Scott, we've got Fugitive Slave Act, we've got Charles Sumner, and we can really start to see how these like fractures are just becoming these large divides, right? Like it's polarizing. You're either here or you're there. You're either north or you're south. Yeah, you can't be a moderate, right?
What we have seems to be a powder keg.
Yeah, powder keg ready to blow.
Yeah, don't know what that word is either, but.
It's like full of gunpowder, right? Like ready to explode.
Oh, yes.
It's like a ticking time bomb.
Yes.
Yeah.
I gotcha. So. Oh,
Wow.
guys.
Next we could find out what happens.
Yeah, because next week we're talking about secession.
Secession.
Yes. What happens next? Woo! Bonus. Underground Railroad. I can't even say that. Railroad.
Railroad. It's like a road, but it's on a rail.
Yeah. Bonus credit for anyone that knows what that is and can kind of send it to us. What do you think?
Sounds good to
Take
me.
it. Let's do it.
Yeah. Bonus. Okay, next week we have a guest speaker coming.
Oh, yes.
I know. And
So excited.
my history teacher.
My history teacher.
Not my history teacher.
Same history teacher, Mr. Amy?
Same history teacher.
But quite a few years difference.
I mean, a little bit of difference. A little bit.
Don't worry, Mr. Amy and I didn't go to high school together.
That's true. Very different.
Miss Lushenko, you walked in his legacy. Yeah.
In my footsteps.
He was preparing the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Paved the way for you.
Some of you might know this guest speaker because you might have, know his daughter. Or he might help you out at football. Or you guys might have him in 2 or 3 years as your own history teacher at Battleground High School.
Whoa.
I know.
What a cliffhanger. I think we should just leave it there.
Okay, well, we'll see you guys next week. Bye, 8th graders.